This mansion may have belonged to one of the most notorious serial killers alive, but this story isn't what you think it is. So let's get into today's Mystery Madness. A mansion on 18 acres of land in a quiet corner of Indiana called Fox Hollow Farms has an absolutely brutal past, and it's well known for all of the horrific murders that happened there at the hands of Herb Baumeister. And if you don't know who Herb Baumeister is, I'll give you a quick little rundown so that you have some backstory for what's about to happen. In 1993, Herb Baumeister was a successful businessman who owned and operated 2 thrift stores with his wife, and to everyone around him, he was a pretty good guy and fun to be around, until reports started to break out in the Indianapolis area that young men were vanishing from the nightclub scenes, and the main suspect was Baumeister. It was also speculated that Herb Baumeister may have been the Grim Reaper of the Highway I-70 murders. A tip was given to police, and so they got a warrant to search his house, and when they did, they found over 10,000 charred human bone fragments buried underneath his property and scattered across his yard. So much so that till this day, they believe that they still haven't found all the bones from his missing victims. Unfortunately though, no one would know the actual truth, because soon after police found the bones and the discovery hit the news, Herb Baumeister fled to Ontario, Canada and shot himself after leaving a 3-page suicide note explaining that the reason he killed himself was due to the problems that he was having with his business and his failing marriage. And so fast forward to May of 2009, a man named Robert and his wife Vicky Graves were looking to buy a house when they ran across a beautiful small mansion called Fox Hollow Farms. And when they went to check it out, they were skeptical as to why the price was so good for a house that was that nice, and then out of nowhere, it kind of struck Robert as to why. The name Fox Hollow Farm rang a bell for Robert, and so while they were on their tour, they asked their real estate agent, "Is this the Fox Hollow Farms as in Herb Baumeister Fox Hollow Farms?" Reluctantly, the real estate agent kind of sighed and said, "Yeah, this is." The real estate agent said that the home is beautiful and in great condition, but unfortunately, due to its past, no one really wants to buy it. Robert and Vicky thought about it for a little bit, and they eventually decided to call the real estate agent and tell them that they're fine with the history of the home. They'll take it. So the family eventually moved into the house and settled down, and at first Robert says that there was no indication that anything was weird or wrong. In fact, they loved the place, and their boys loved running around the woods and swimming in the pool. And Robert said that it was great, and he didn't really realize how much work it took to maintain a place that was that big, but other than that, everything was fantastic. Until one day, Vicky was in the swimming pool room doing some chores when the boys had came in from outside tracking in dirt and gravel. So she grabbed the vacuum and started to clean it up, and while she was vacuuming, suddenly it turned off. She looked at the cord and realized that she must have tugged on it a little too hard while she was cleaning and pulled it out from the socket. So she went over, plugged it back in, and went back to vacuuming. And then to her surprise, it did it again. Vicky was a little irritated and went to go plug it back in and noticed that the cord was sitting more than a foot away from the socket. And she's thinking like, there's no way that she yanked on it that hard. And Vicky was a scientist by profession before they moved into the farm, so she definitely wasn't one to believe in ghosts or anything paranormal. She thought it was weird, but she brushed it off as just one of those things and went back to vacuuming. And right after she did, she's looking over in the direction where the plug socket is, making sure that she's not going to pull it out again. And as she's watching, she watched the cable fly out from the socket as if somebody yanked it out. It really startled Vicky, and she couldn't come up with an explanation as to how it happened. And even though she's really analytical about these things, she said that she just had a strong sense that something she just couldn't see didn't want her to be there. But that was only their first strange encounter. Several months later, Robert had a co-worker named Joe LeBlanc that needed a new place to live. He was constantly late to work because of how long and terrible his commute was to the dealership, and Robert thought that with so much space at their house and an extra apartment right above the garage with a private entrance that he could offer Joe the space. So he spoke to Joe, and Joe thought it was a great idea, but Robert thought before having Joe move in that he should tell him about the history of their home just in case. But Joe didn't seem to mind at all. In fact, he embraced the idea of living at such an infamous place. So about a month later, Robert helped Joe move his stuff into the new apartment. And on the first night, Joe had an extremely vivid dream where he was desperately running away from something that was chasing him in the woods. And when he woke up, his body was still half asleep in fight or flight mode, and he quickly got up and ran straight into the door frame, slamming his head. And as he was coming to his senses, he was thinking that he's never had a dream feel so real before, but he thought that maybe Vicky telling him the story about what happened on the farm kinda just triggered his mind in some kind of way. And so one day while Robert was painting part of the house, he heard Vicky pull into the driveway, and after she got out the car, they were talking about what he had done around the house so far, and that's when he noticed that something caught Vicky's eye. Vicky was looking at a young man in a bright red shirt and denim jeans just strolling through the woods on their property, but the man's back was turned towards them so she couldn't see his face. And just when she was about to call out to the man, she noticed something that absolutely terrified her. The man that she was looking at was missing most of his legs, as in like from the thighs down, there was absolutely nothing but air. Vicky was looking at a ghost, and before she could say anything, the man vanished. And so Robert, trying to be the level-headed one, suggested that Fox Hollow Farms is gonna attract some unwanted attention from serial killer enthusiasts. And he's not saying that Vicky's lying, but maybe her eyes were just playing tricks on her. And so to comfort Vicky, Robert went around the property to look for anyone that wasn't supposed to be there, but he didn't find anything. And so jokingly he said, well, you know, looks like you must have seen a ghost. Vicky, kind of irritated, said, I know what I saw, as they were making their way back into the house, but neither of them could explain what actually happened. And so it was at the end of Joe's first week of living on the farm, and he had just finished eating dinner and was washing dishes when somebody started to knock on his door. He figured that it was Robert or Vicky, so he yelled out, I'll be there in just a second. He dried his hands, and that's when he noticed that the knocking started getting louder and faster as if somebody was rushing him to open the door. So he yelled out again, I said I'll be right there. And that's when Joe's dog got up from the living room, and Joe could see the hairs on the spine of his dog raising as if he was in fear, which by all means wasn't too normal for him at all. So Joe quickly went to open the door, and to his horror, nobody was there. He didn't see anybody on the staircase, and there was nowhere for anyone to hide, and so he thought, that's kind of weird. But he shrugged it off and sat down to watch TV, and then he suddenly seen somebody sitting in his bedroom. And that's when his dog got up again and started barking at them. He said he felt dread, but he mustered up the courage to investigate who it was, and when he went into his room, there was no one there. And so confused, he turned on all the lights and started looking for a reasonable explanation. He walked through the house's driveway to see if he could see anybody, and he seen a man in a bright red shirt. Joe's dog took off after the man, chasing him into the woods, and though Joe was in full panic mode, he just couldn't let his dog go into the woods alone, so he ran in after him. And as he crossed into the tree line of the woods, he seen his dog turned around, standing still looking in his direction. But he noticed that he wasn't looking directly at him, he was kind of looking to the side of him. And that's when Joe turned his head to see what he was looking at, and he seen the man standing right next to him. And in complete fear, Joe ran out of the woods to the apartment with his dog following right behind him. And so when they got inside the apartment, he shut and locked the door, and he was peeking out the window all night to see if the man in the red had followed him, but he didn't see anything. And so the next day, Joe rushed over to Robert and Vicky to explain what happened last night, and when he told them, Vicky immediately became horrified because that confirmed that she just wasn't seeing things. And so the next night, Joe was locked up in his apartment, hoping that it wouldn't be as bad as the night before. And as he was looking out the window in fear, he heard someone knock on his door so aggressively that the door was literally rattling. And as the door is vibrating from somebody banging on it, Joe went to confront the situation and open the door as it's still happening, and when he did, no one was there again. And as he's standing there, he noticed that the knocker on the door was standing perpendicular to the ground as if somebody was holding it midway in the air, and then it slammed down, knocking on the door one last time. Joe quickly ran back to his room, and as he was anxiously locking the door, he saw the doorknob turning all by itself, and then it stopped. And after a moment of silence, the door slammed open. He ran out of the apartment to see if he could find who was doing this, to rationalize what was going on, but he didn't see anybody. And when he came back inside, he seen a man soaked in what looked like water run right across him and out of his apartment, and it scared him to death. So much so that he ran right over to Rob and Vicky again to tell them what happened. So trying to find some answers, they began looking through some of the old news footage that included pictures of the victims, and that's when Joe saw the young man who ran through his apartment. And that's when the three came to the conclusion that the house was haunted by the victims of Herb Baumeister, and convinced themselves that they were the victims of an unfortunate situation so they wouldn't harm them. But something happened soon after that might change their minds. Not too long after that, Joe was walking with his dog when it took off running. Joe chased after him, and when they stopped, something caught Joe's eye. He dug it out of the leaves and realized that it looked like a human bone. He took it to Rob and Vicky, and Vicky said that it looked like a femur bone. They believed it was found where they had seen the man in the red shirt, so they called the lead detective on the case to report the bone, and he agreed to come out to take a report on what happened and where they found it. But according to reports, the bone remains unidentified. And shortly after that, a friend of Joe's named Jeremy wanted to visit the house to put to bed the rumors of it being haunted. So they were in the pool room diving to retrieve dead beetles from the bottom when Joe felt somebody touch his back. He thought it might have been one of the boys, but he noticed that they were on the other side of the pool. And as Joe was swimming back to the other side where his friends are, he was pulled under and felt fingers of somebody choking him. And Jeremy was watching in horror as Joe put his hands around his neck, panicking like he's never seen a look of panic on his face before. Joe thankfully managed to escape and get everybody out of the pool. And not too long after that, one night while Joe was working on his computer, he heard metallic noises coming from the kitchen, and when he went to check on what was going on, he saw all the knives from his butcher block in the sink and cuts in the wood walls. So it made him think, like, did somebody get stabbed in the kitchen? And so Joe thought that it was a ghost of a victim, so after watching some ghost hunting shows, he turned off the AC and took out his phone and started recording. He asked multiple times, who was in the kitchen? Who's there with me? But he got no answers. He kinda laughed at himself, thinking how ridiculous it was of him to do something like that, but he transferred the recordings to his computer anyways and listened to it, and in the recording, he heard a man answered, the married one. And the creepiest part of that is that out of all the victims of Herb Baumeister, none of them were married. The only one who was married was Herb Baumeister himself. But that's gonna wrap it up, guys, so if you wanna hear another story even scarier than this one, click on this video here.